Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rams Review podcast once again with me, your host, Jason. And as always, joining this week, we've got Mr. Chris Holt. Chris, good evening.
Good evening, gentlemen. It's been a week or so since we last chat, so plenty to catch up on.
Absolutely. And Jack's with us as well. Jack, good evening.
Evening, guys. Yeah, big FA Cup tie that maybe didn't quite live up to expectations on the pitch, but do you know what? It was a decent run out, and I think that was what Derby were looking for out of it, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the main review game this week as Derby succumbed to a 2-1. Was it 2-1 in the end?
3-1.
Three.
Three. See, this is how poorly I was on Sunday. I've obviously completely forgotten. Of course, there was a goal right at the end, wasn't there? So Derby succumbed to a 3-1 defeat at the hands of old Yorkshire enemy Leeds United. I mean, there are obviously some talking points, but I probably not loads and loads. Kind of what we expected, Jack. Leeds put out a slightly second string side. And it was all about could Derby, also put out not a fully second string side, but there was certainly a few changes. A debut from Mr. Oscar Fraulo in midfield. In fact, quite a big day for Derby's midfield on Sunday, with obviously Travis getting a good 65 minutes under his belt, Ozo coming back, Fraulo's debut, and then of course we've got the youngster teams to talk about as well. Um, and I think and certainly that first half, it was an entertaining cup tie. We'd already seen probably the upset of the weekend with Macclesfield beating cup holders Crystal Palace, which that just goes to show you what football can be. Um, and Leeds knew that they'd have to turn up to Pride Park on Sunday and put in a performance. And for the first 45 minutes, let's focus on that first. As Derby went into that break, 1-0 up, and man of the year yet again, our Chilean forward, Mr. Diaz, has got three goals in 4 games now in January. I don't know what he must have had on his gravy over Christmas, in his gravy, but it's obviously working well. But all in all, that entire move started by Blackett Taylor, who I'm sure is going to be somebody we have to discuss certainly in the first half, because he was one of Derby's brighter sparks. Um, and then I think we could just to sum it up in full before we dissect it. Leeds were going to step it up a gear, you would assume, in that second half. That's exactly what they did. Derby just slightly trailed off, which again is not too unfamiliar from Derby this season. I don't know if they tried to defend it or what, but they certainly didn't give it the same energy. Well, it certainly didn't look like they gave it the same energy in the second half, and risk it too much. And yeah, in the end, that Premier League quality shines through, and Derby go out of the cup, which I must admit I'm not too fussed, as a trip to Birmingham would have been on the cards in the fourth round. And whilst I'm sure it would have been a nice little money spinner for Derby, it's not exactly the most glamorous of ties. So full concentration, Jack, now can turn to the league. I know I've just waffled on loads there, but let's look at that opening first half, and as we say, Derby go into the break, and like we've seen a lot of teams do so far this season, they had a game plan. I'm not sure they executed it fully. Derby really created a couple of chances and took one, which is now what, the 25th out of 28 games this season that they've scored in, or whatever it is. We've said it before that Derby can't continue to keep being this clinical. Well, they are being. Obviously, it just seems to be more than one in a game at the moment that Derby seems to be struggling with. But all in all, that first 45 minutes is probably the period of time that Eustace is going to be more keen on than probably the second.
Yeah, of course. I mean, he did admit that his team tired as the game went on, and I think we saw that because the first 45 minutes, Derby were pretty competitive. I mean, I think if you're watching that as a neutral, you're a little bit disappointed with what is such a historic kind of battle, but it suited Derby down to the ground. Leeds were dominating the ball, but really mustering low quality chances until Piru rattled off the post. And then, of course, there's the penalty as well, where it's a great height for Zetterstrom to make the save, let's face it. So, yeah, 2.5 minutes later, Derby are at the other end. And that goal comes from a weakness from Leeds, really, as much as it comes from quality from Derby. So Blackett Taylor down the left, really direct, as we know. His first starts in Stoke on the opening day. And he can surely take some confidence for his performance because that direct run was exactly what they needed to do to exploit the weakness of Leeds on the right hand side of their defensive third. Uh, Bornell on the right of Leeds stack three is not natural, really, in covering those wide spaces. Hence why Daniel Farker brought James Justin on at half time. And it showed because, yeah, Blackett Taylor then gets kind of bumped off the ball by Wilfred Nonto. 13 cap Italy international, by the way, as Leeds' backup winger compared to a £300,000 man who caught Derby's attention after a good half season in League One. There is your difference in backups in the squads. Ball breaks for Brereton Diaz, and yeah, it's just a good drilled finish across goal for 2-2. John Eustace told me after the game how delighted he is with his brilliant forward, and he's talking again about growing in confidence. I think that and fitness were my key takeaways. I think this was about as much as beating Leeds would have been nice because it's Leeds. If you thought about this as a derby against the Premier League side and the FA Cup, this was about getting desperately minutes into players and trying to build up the confidence and sharpness of some of these rotation options because what's coming up next is a period of 3 games inside a week. And yeah, that's going to be where rotation options, substitutes are needed because I did the research last night. Derby have only got 2 goals from substitutes in the league this season, which is obviously joint second lowest. I think there's 2 teams that've got only 1 goal from substitutes, but you contrast that to the opposite end of the scale where QPR have 8, and you do see the difference there. After all the criticism that we've had of substitutions in recent weeks, kind of weakening Derby, I think this was about just trying to improve that scenario for future games rather than necessarily having better substitutions to try and turn the game around in this specific fixture.
Were both of them Salverson?
That is a very good question. I think they must have been.
Yeah,
One is
certainly
Hull.
one will be.
One is definitely Hull at home.
Yeah.
And I think the previous game, didn't he come on and score? I can't remember.
Let's have a
No.
look.
Sorry, Jason.
No, you're all right. It's a good point. I was going to say Salverson's got to be one of them. Not 100% sure who the other one is. As we say,
You know what? You
we
guys go
struggled.
on. You guys go on. Keep discussing the game, and I'll do that research now.
No worries. Cheers for that, Jack. Yeah. So, Chris, I mean, like I say, that first half we saw obviously Derby trying to compete, and whilst again Leeds had a fair amount of the ball, they did open a couple of opportunities. Zetterstrom, for me, has come away again with a bit of a shining light, and it's hard to say that sometimes when he's conceded 3 goals, but obviously none of them particularly his fault. We're moving to that second half as well, and again, all 3 goals are avoidable. But we've been saying that against much lesser opposition this season, so there's not really a great deal to discuss on that. But let's look at the positives from selection point of view. Travis getting 60 minutes, it's got to be important. He put himself about. For me, and Leeds are a team that you're going to have to do that. He put himself about. He looked like he was up for the challenge. That's going to be an important piece of the jigsaw back in the championship when it is more rough and tumble. I thought Travis certainly didn't do himself any harm whatsoever. And then Oscar Fraulo, obviously, we kind of hoped we'd get to see him in from the start. I know it's a very, very small sample size, and I'm sure it's something that we hope we see more of over the next 4 or 5 games. But Chris, he looked busy without obviously really making a making a huge contribution, but he looked like he put himself about that box to box that John Eustace has said. Obviously, we'll have to probably just after rein his disciplinary outbursts back a little bit because I'm sure that I think he got the yellow card for throwing the ball away, is that's what they call it these days. Um, but I thought it was for somebody obviously who's not played much football over the winter period, as they don't over in Holland. He came in, and I don't think, again, this is against Premier League opposition. I do appreciate it's not their starting midfield, I'm sure, but still, didn't necessarily look out of place, looked busy, and one that we know is one to sort of build into the team in the second half of the season. And at least he didn't have a stinker like we have seen a couple of over the years Derby players making debuts. I think back to a certain Dutch centre half who basically his career was over within 20 minutes, not 5 or 6 years ago.
Mike de Verac, if I remember rightly.
Mm.
Yeah, that was a debut to not remember, isn't it? I thought he brought intelligence into the midfield. He tried to be creative. His pass accuracy wasn't great. I think it was just over 50%, which is not surprising for a chap who barely knows his teammates' names, never mind the style of football they're expected to play. But what I did like about him is his understanding of how to fill pockets of space when defending and not go gun ho chasing after the ball. I thought his intelligence and made Derby look more solid in that first half by being able to slot into space that was required to have someone there just to prevent an option of an outlet. And that's a skill set from a midfielder who's able to read a game and put presence on the game without actually being on the ball. And then you look at the formation change when he went off and Adams came on, and all of a sudden you've got, with all due respect to Ebo Adams, a headless chicken who fundamentally can get away with energy and enthusiasm for a certain amount of games and a certain level of game. Against Leeds United, you're just not going to get away with it. So I actually thought that Fraulo showed some real nice decision making, understanding, reading of the game, responsibility without doing too much. And I think Eustace has sort of teased us with a potential formation change as well. And he's possibly found that player. My only concern, Jason, with Fraulo is let's hope that he's not like Howard who promised so much, but fundamentally the biggest issue that he had was his physicality. And Fraulo isn't the biggest guy, as we know. He hasn't played many minutes in the Bundesliga. I think someone was telling me barely half a game in total this season. But I liked what I saw. One thing I will say is people said to me today, "Oh, Derby's pass accuracy was absolutely awful. We were barely above 50%, Jason." And what I'll say with that is, well, Zetterstrom's kicking wasn't great, although he had a great game in general regarding his shot stopping. He'd lost his way a bit with his kicking again. His pass accuracy was below 30%. Whereas look at Darlow, a Premier League player whose pass accuracy as a goalkeeper alone was 80%. And I just think in general, throughout the game, and you look at various snippets and various matchups and what have you, final third, Leeds United had 100 touches in our final third alone, which is incredible, you know. And yes, they had dominance with possession, and to some extent, Derby held that and took a lead, which you'll go into. But the only thing that disappointed me about the whole game was it was clear to me that there was changes already written down on piece of paper, minute management, who would go where, and I don't like that. I think the FA Cup is worth more than that, and I think Derby County fans paying 20 quid plus a ticket are worth more than that. But we'll come to that later in the show.
Yeah, I was listening to the talking last night, and I must admit there was a couple of people saying certainly tickets, I believe, in the West Stand that were tipping £30 for an FA Cup tie. And I don't necessarily agree with this statement, but I can understand where it was coming from. Using it as a training match, then yes, I can see where people can get disgruntled when they're spending their hard-earned money. But yeah, Jack, I mean, like Chris has just alluded to there was certain players, and let's be honest, Derby played what about 50 games in December with about the same 14 players, so it was always going to be about one or two people having a bit of a rest, one or two getting hopefully a little bit more game time, probably a couple of players, and this does tie us into the conversation later on in the podcast about transfers. A couple of players that weren't involved at all on Sunday, which makes me feel that their futures clearly don't lie at Derby County. But we shall move on to that point a little later on. But let's talk the goal. We've briefly touched on it, but it is the talking point of the game from a Derby's perspective. And yeah, Blackett Taylor with his directness. Again, they brought on more experience in the second half and nullified him. But there are going to be defences he can do that against in the Championship, and obviously that is now his. That's basically got to be his target, isn't it? If given the opportunity, he's got to be doing that. I think he does deserve a run of games. I think it's harsh for him to not be given a fair crack of the whip. Plenty of others have. And then, you look at the others, Salverson, let's face it, he was a passenger in that game yet again. I thought Danny Bat come in at the back and did as well as you would have expected him to. And then, yeah, and obviously we've got young games to talk about in a minute. But yeah, Berrettini Diaz then, it's another goal as we've kind of, you've got to be there. And I would say, again, a bit similar to his goal the other week. If that lad was so low with confidence, I'm not so sure he even attempts that. It is a bit of a snapshot. It's through it's just one of those where just the keeper's got no time to react, has he? But he's got to be in there, and he does look. And I don't know if this is just because of, let's face it, the criticism that he has had. I don't know if I'm looking at it through rose-tinted glasses a little bit, but I thought he was worse in some games beginning of the season than he actually was. But it does look like he is giving that little bit more energy, that bit more effort. But I just don't know if that's just because I'm sort of scrutinizing his performance. I'm really kind of honing in on what he does rather than, 60 minutes has gone by and you just think to yourself, oh, I've not seen Diaz really touch the ball. But I say that's three or four now, 4 or 5 goal involvements already in 13 days of this season. Got to be a positive for Derby, especially when, Adjiman at some point we would assume is going to drift in and out of the side when Morris comes in. Obviously, Blackett Taylor, Brewster, we just don't seem to be getting too much of the tune out of still, and I'm sure that's down to fitness. And so you've got to have, and obviously Adjiman has over the last couple of games has almost been non-existent, probably because he is absolutely knackered, and hopefully that little rest will do him good. But as we say, moving on into a 3-game week, having somebody who's in a little bit of form is never a bad thing.
No, and I think the optic that we saw in his form before he bagged those couple of goals was really in kind of work rate and stuff, and me being noticed that little bit more in sort of attacking areas rather than this sort of slightly hybrid wingback role where he say like at Swansea where we started with sort of 4-4-2 and then we drop into a 3-5-2 with Verrettini Diaz as a wingback. By getting him further up the pitch, getting him into these positions, he can use those kind of poacher's instincts, and that on top of a bit of athleticism as he's built fitness over the course of the season that we started to see, is definitely a benefit. And I think that's a key thing with this Derby side and what John Eustace wants. I mean, I think if you look at pretty much all of his kind of key players, they all have that athletic physical profile, and it's actually something that he even praised Fraulo for his athleticism in just those 45 minutes with him being ahead of schedule. So I think that side of things, whilst he's not the biggest, he's certainly more relentless than someone like a Houtman. So concerns alleviated somewhat there if he keeps that up. But yeah, Brendan Diaz, it is. It's about confidence. It's about momentum. And as I say, I think you saw that with him, with Blackett Taylor, Danny Bart, as you say, did really well. And actually, uh, I think part of the reason that the chances for Leeds were relatively low quality was because of his marshalling in that box. I mean, in that first half, they had 5 shots in the box, uh, and only two of them were within 12 yards of Derby's goal, other than penalty. So yeah, they were restricted. They struggled to get really close to the goal. I think Danny Bart being that physical aerial presence was a decent factor in that. And then he went close a couple of times to headed into the top corner as well. So I think he's proving that he is fairly reliable when called upon. I think the difference that we see now compared to his first couple of games of the season when he was starting is again in building up that fitness, which we know was a problem at the start of the season, but also say at Birmingham or say against the Premier League side in Leeds, if you've got Danny Bart able to sit back in a lower block, then great. You can't have him trying to venture out and play a high line. He doesn't have the legs for that. But yeah, if you as a kind of head it kick it defender, he's reliable, it seems, and I think that is another great option for Derby. It's worth saying, by the way, in terms of omissions at the back, really important, according to John Eustace, that Matt Clark and Dion Sanderson were rested. Uh, Curtis Nelson, meanwhile, wasn't in the squad, was he? And that would oh no, he was sorry, he's on the bench on youth sub. Who am I thinking of? But he didn't come on. So whether that points to anything, I'm not sure. Uh, in terms of the other kind of relatively notable absentee, Caden Jackson not in the matchday squad, as well as Clark and Sanderson. Apparently, that's routine. He's fine. So whether that points to him being on the way out is another one, maybe just to watch out for.
Yeah, definitely. Again, something we're going to move on to in a little while. But to close off the Leeds chat then and Derby's exit of the FA Cup, we talk two other midfielders, Chris. One returning, obviously, in David Ozo, which we know will bring a little bit of quality, a little bit of calmness, and something else, a bit of a ball carrier in that midfield. But the thing is, we're almost then back to the sort of original dilemma at the beginning of the season where we tried these partnerships out and none of them really quite settled, in my opinion. Of course, Travis was a new entity. Bobby Clark, we were trying to squeeze in there. So, you'd like to think that that transition of the midfield again by probably the end of January is going to look very different to what it is now. And hopefully it looks and it's easier and more settled. But obviously, Ozo coming back's always good. And then, of course, Owen Eames, the man of the moment, comes on for 20 minutes, absolutely put himself about. By Christ, he's got some pace. Um, didn't look out of place. I've heard glowing reviews of him down in the under 18s. Obviously, John's had his comments about him when he's been training with the first squad. But I think, as a podcast as we are, we have to praise positivity, but we've also got to stay a little bit grounded. Anybody being given their debut in the FA Cup third round against a Premier League side for 15 minutes is going to, excuse the French, run the bollocks off. It doesn't mean he's a shoe in for 90 minutes in the Championship on Saturday, does it?
No, it doesn't. And partnerships take time to gel. And I think Derby's Achilles heel this year or this season is that they haven't had any partnerships that have had that longevity to gel. You know, Jack will be able to do the stats at some point on how many midfield duos or trios have we had different between the start of the season and currently. And then you bring in Ozo back, whose pass percentage completion was 100% again. Always is high with Ozo. Wonderful passer of the ball. Has an intelligence about him far older than his than his actual age. He's a very, very intelligent player. Um, and I would love to see him just put together a run of half a dozen games with Travis and either one not get suspended or one not get injured. Because I think it makes a huge difference, Jason. You know, and I know spines of teams are the essence of success. We've got a fantastic goalkeeper. We've still got the centre forward that's in the top two of top scorers in the league and he hasn't played for 2 bloody months. What we're missing the central part of that spine, aren't we? So yeah, it's great to see them back. I think Travis has been hard done by somewhat by some fans. He came in from Blackburn. He had been isolated there, was training on his own, getting very little support from the club. So I think when he does come back, he clearly is going to be a different player physically, mentally, than he was when he made his debut. And I think that's only a good thing. Owen Eames, Swaddling Coat lad, he lives up the road from where I live. In fact, plays for the local cricket team where I live as well. So I'm not sure how many balls he'll be facing this summer. I have a feeling now as a professional footballer, he won't be allowed to hold a bit of willow between his hands. But what pace! Incredible pace. Always had that pace. He reminds me of an even better version of Jason Knight, and that is frightening to think. He needs managing sensibly. Enthusiasm will get you so far in the championship, but eventually get found out. I think if he's managed sensibly, like Max Bird, Jason Knight, I think we've got some player there on his hands. He's a Derby fan. He loves the football club. He loves the area, and I think that's the kind of thing that we need in and around our squad. So I think he's been managed well. But yeah, I think actually it's exciting times to see the bodies that came back, and then we've still got the best one to come back, haven't we? With our friend up front.
Yeah, it does feel like, and like you said, the key thing now is getting them back, getting them fit, and building those partnerships together. Because I mean, there's no, Ebu and Clark, they plugged a gap. But let's face it, they are not a top six midfield championship midfield. They're not. There's no bite in there. That there isn't what you really need. So they've served a purpose. I'm sure Clark will stay in and around because I think he's been a shining light over the past 3 months. Ebo Adams, on the other hand, I think we probably, if we keep Travis and Ozo fit, I think Ebu does become less and less of a start, certainly of a starter. Um, where does that leave Thompson? There's, especially if Eames is going to. I know they're different players, but if he's going to start getting a bit of a sniff around, um, and I suppose really this now then, Jack, is we've obviously we're past the halfway mark with the FA Cups out the way. This is now focus on the Championship, and still clearly focus on survival. I mean, it would be catastrophic for Derby to get dragged into a relegation dogfight now, and I do believe Derby are above that. Or Derby are going to mount the challenge now. Your likes of your Southamptons, your Ipswichers, and whatever else are really starting to come to the fore. No, possibly not. But I mean, obviously, don't give up the ghost until it's done. But it's almost now like your likes of your Fraulo, your Eames, if you want to integrate them in over the next 2 months. Derby have just got to get as many points on the board as they can, so they can give some of these players opportunities. Of course, we've still not seen any other signings as we're nearly halfway through January now. We don't know what other players are going to be coming in January. Are they going to be signings for the here and now, or again, are they going to be ones that they're going to try and drip feed in between now and the end of the season? You want to really try and give those types of players 5, 6, 7, 8 games if you can, where obviously there's. I know it's going to sound boring, and some fans might not like this, but where they're nothing as such nothing games, and we can try different slight formation tweaks or whatever. John's not obviously really that type of manager, but just trying to build a system ready then for then obviously coming into pre-season. He'll know what players he wants, I'm sure, already for the summer, and then Derby can go again. if Derby are obviously challenging at the right end of the table, those those players might just have to wait and they get integrated in pre-season, and that's no problem. Hopefully it's not the other way, where of course it'd be very, very harsh to throw a couple of 18, 19-year-olds in expecting them to keep Derby up, because that's just not the way really you develop players. So it's a crucial couple of months. I mean, obviously it's a crucial 4 or 5 months till the end of the season, but if Derby can just, now we've got a bit coming back. Obviously, Morris coming back is going to be a key thing. If Derby can just keep ticking, and picking up points, we know there's parts of the performances and the whole 90 minutes that has to really improve in fans' minds. But use this second half of the season to obviously try and iron out a few of those. If we can integrate one or two of the academy lads in and around it as well, you never know. Like we've just said, you don't know until they're thrust into it, do you? We've seen it so many times over Derby in a very short space of time. How many, if that be, they play for the second half of the season and you sell them for 2 million in the summer, whatever it may well be, if Derby need to generate that money. But they need to be blooded in under the right circumstances, and so I think it is crucial that maybe January or the rest of January, early February, certainly up to the March international break is probably going to be quite telling on then where the final 10 games of the season goes.
Yeah, I mean, I remind you that Derby sat on 35 points after 26 games, uh, have hit the points total that they had after 37 last season. So on the trajectory they're on, if they could keep that up, then there will be a few games that are probably a bit of a dead rubber towards the end of the season, as you say. Now, I think the factor that we're holding on to as to whether Derby could push higher up, as you say, is Carlton Morris. If he comes back and hits the ground running uh, in the next few weeks and can score at the rate he did of roughly, well, just under 2 goals every 3 games, then maybe things start to look a little bit different. But yeah, no, I think realistically it is about balance. I think what we start to see from John Eustace is not necessarily tinkering with formation, but maybe he starts to look back towards his initial intention for the season. We saw a sort of 4-2-3-1 on Sunday, and I think that is still probably his long-term vision. Of course, you've got presumably a left back to come in, Max Johnston's come back, who was kind of designed to be the first choice right back. So maybe that changes things around the back four. And then yeah, this midfield dynamic as well. I think Bobby Clark has obviously benefited in his all-round game from playing deeper, but they clearly want to get him back into that number 10 role, or even as an 11 on the left wing. Uh, and what that allows, or what allows that more so, is having those other midfielders back. So I think the balance, as you say, you get Travis, Ozo in, you try and get them some minutes. Still Ozo's minutes really for the first time since he came to Derby. If he could have a proper consistent run of 10 plus games, that would be great. And you can slowly blood Oscar Fraulo into that as well. And I think that may be where John Eustace was going when he was talking about Fraulo not necessarily being one for this season. I think they don't want to put that much on him. If he continues to exceed their expectations the way he has done in terms of his fitness in training over the first couple of weeks he's been at the club, then that could change. But yeah, Derby will certainly suddenly have options, and it will be, as you say, about finding that optimal balance. And for Owen Eames as well, if you get a number 10 consistently into the team in Bobby Clark, then can you give him some minutes, rotating with him in that scenario as well? Because the other person really that I can think would play there is Andy Vyman, who is the other person to come off the bench to score for Derby this season with his winner at West Brom, just to tie that one up from earlier on.
Cracking research done there, Jack. Actually, a name we've not mentioned there. Surprised maybe he wasn't more involved on Sunday as well. So obviously not somebody would expect to leave in January either, as he is only just coming in the summer, and obviously he is a bit part squad player as such. So yeah, it's but again though, Chris, all that can change dependent on what Derby do in the transfer window. Now, I'd be absolutely gobsmacked if they go out and spend another 6 million on a striker. But you know, I think the rumours sort of are that they are going to have to sell before they bring in. And we look at that team. We're talking about the likes of a Jackson or maybe a Thompson or those kind of players. They're not going to raise the kind of money where then Derby can go on a bit of a spending spree the last week in January, are they? So I think like, a bit like we said the other week, it's if somebody can come in, great. I think you're going to expect it to be loans. And as long as they're smart ones, maybe with a view to a permanent deal in the future or something like that, don't really see the point in taking a youngster from the Premier League for 6 months when you know then you're not going to get, unless there's a deal to then have them in the summer again on a season long loan if they perform. Um, I mean, obviously, there's still 15 days 18 days of the window to go, so plenty of time for Derby to do business. But I'm not expecting, five signings coming in so Derby start on a top six charge.
No, but I think he will see bodies exit the front door because it frees up wage slots that can be spent elsewhere, the likes of Jackson, Nelson. I wouldn't be surprised if Salverson goes, to be honest, on loan somewhere. Germany's been mentioned. Thompson, I think he'll keep him for his energy. Um, but for me, Jason, there's big question marks over is he getting the best out of certain players? Are the medical staff looking after certain players in the right way? And it comes back down to Corey Blackett Taylor. Have we seen enough now to give him another 6 months opportunity, or do we know that inevitably he's going to break down like a racehorse by the end of the month? To me, I think Blackett Taylor's never going to settle. His Derby career is just over 800 minutes, full stop, in total. And he's been here nearly, what, 2 years now? Well, no, he signed. To be fair, yeah, it's about 2 years. He signed. It was a late January signing, wasn't he? So there's that question to be asked. And I think, going into the final bits of the pod in the next 10 to 15 minutes, I think one of the most important things that Derby need to find is that I think we have the squad capable of challenging the top six if they're all fit, but finding a way to win, Jason. For somehow Derby have lost the way to win, and that worries me somewhat. That you know last year with the threadbare squad we had, we found ways to win. So that's something I think we need to discuss going into the pod.
So, as Chris alluded to there, that there are other talking points. Before we look ahead to Derby's fixtures coming up with a trip to Preston and a trip to the Valley, two very difficult trips for Derby in the space of 4 days. We'll have previews coming out for those, so we won't tread on too many toes there as we'll have a full breakdown of those games. But yeah, like you were saying there, Chris, it's I think partnerships. I think that's one of the biggest words. I think Derby have got to look at that now, and like you say, that try and find a way to win. We do seem to have gone off the boil with that a little bit, and we all know the Christmas period is difficult. It's difficult for everybody, get that. But it, we say it, winning. Look at the run that we went on. Very easy to pick up those. Derby looked unbeatable in that 5-6 game stretch, and now we've only won one in that. It does read a different tale. I was actually interested to so we look back to that period of time where obviously it just clicked for those 5 or 6 games, and we should have, in fact, won about what was it? We probably should have won 7 or 8 on the bounce or something like that. I was thinking about this the other day, and I wanted to bring it up as a talking point on the podcast last week, and I completely forgot to do so. Um, when you actually look where Derby sit at the moment, then 13th, 26 games. Obviously, we're three over halfway, 35 points, which we know is a much better return on where we were last season. But I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball into this, and we do look back at that nice little period where Derby picked up those results after the Oxford game by beating Norwich at home, QPR at home, beating Sheffield United away, Hull at home, Blackburn away. And let's face it, we should have picked up something against Watford. We then beat Swansea. We possibly should have got something in Middlesbrough. And then since then, other than beating the league's whipping boys, in no disrespect, we've picked up one win. And so that was 6 out of 8. So that's 18 points. That's over half the points that we've got this season has come in 7 games. We're 26 games into the season. That's 19 games where Derby have picked up what, another 10, if that. And that's where I know you've been an advocate for it, Chris, of Derby being a side that can make a challenge to the top six with the squad that they've got. And as you say, I think when they're all fit, absolutely. I do think this, especially this season, I think Derby can compete against the teams in that top six. But when you look at that stat where over 50% of the points came in a 6 game period in 1 month or best part of 6 weeks, that just goes to show you that the other side of the sandwich there is just it's just not been good enough, and we know that there's reasons behind that, and so that kind of ties in with what we want to see in this second half. Like you say, we kind of know, I think, what the centre half pairing really is going to be moving forward. I wouldn't be surprised if next season it's not Sanderson and Langas and Clark's more on the bench. The midfield we've already seen we've got to work at that. We know probably John's first choice right back is out at the moment. He's not got a left back that he feels comfortable with, although Elder's been very good. Obviously, he tried to bring in Owen Beck, injured. Who knows? Did he go for him again in the summer? Maybe. Who knows? We've got a couple of midfielders in the middle that are on loan that aren't our players. The wingers, we've not got a lot of wingers, and we've gambled on a couple of them who are unfit. And then, of course, yeah, you bring in your two signings who have contributed a fair amount to this team. Well, one of them's injured and one of them's slightly gone off the boil after only obviously his first foray into Championship football. And then you look at that squad on the bench, even when all fit, everything that we've said in the podcast, where the impact off the bench hasn't been good enough. It's still not a 25-man squad for me that is as good as it can be. And of course, John's had one transfer window at it. I'm not saying that the club haven't done enough. And I think anything anywhere near where we are now finishing is an improvement, and I think you have to accept that. Um, am I a bit surprised that we're not further up the table? I don't think that's fair. But the squad, has it been as settled as I expected it to be? No. And obviously we know that there's injuries means that that's probably not the case. I mean, obviously mainly the most one ever present has been the goalkeeper. And if I'm not being funny, Chris, if he continues the way he's done in the next 6 months, he might not be at Derby in the summer because he will be somebody that the club may well, if certainly a Premier League club decide to flash a bit of money, Derby aren't going to turn that kind of money down, and we know that. And so then there's another rebuild. It's like you were saying about the midfield, the spine of the team. We've just not had it all season, have we? I'm sorry, I'm rambling on again, but we've
That's
not
okay.
had that. We've not had that John's preferred spine of the team for long enough this season. And I think that just goes to explain when we did, we were winning games. And either side of that, we haven't had that spine. And when you've not got that and you've got one or two others, injury reasons and players off the boil, um, you actually look back at it now and you look at the points tally that Derby have got, and we should probably have another 10 or 15. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a Derby fan, but you look at it and you think, God, and where does another 15 points put you? Or 10. Let's be, let's not take it too far. Another 10 points. Where does another 10 points put this Derby side? Pretty much exactly where you're saying, challenging in that
Third.
six. Yeah, challenging in there, and I'll still hold my hand up and say I don't think this team is a top six side. So, um, plenty to unpack there, mate. Take your pick on what you want to go for.
Well, it's one thing I'd say to our good friend Jack is that I'd love to know how many changes John Eustace had to make in the last 10 games of last season. Because he had limited choice, but he had a set choice, Jason. He had a set Probably, I would say he used no more than 14, 15 players, Jack, and you'd be able to, that's a stat for you to perhaps look at between now and the next show. Whereas I bet at the moment Derby have used far more players this season already, and you just cannot get that consistency. Um, I think the Zetterstrom situation is interesting because he clearly is going to have ambition. He smelt the championship. He's obviously clearly enjoying it. He obviously loves English football. He's well spoken. He's clearly showing his ability to all. I hear Forest have even been sniffing, which is disturbing. So I think inevitably he was bought to sell on. I don't think he was a long-term goalkeeper. I think a long-term goalkeeper at Derby County will be probably late 20s, early 30s. Will give you 6 good years. Someone like a Scott Carson or of that sort of ilk is that where we need. I think Zetterstrom was always bought to be an asset and sell on. I think you're right about the centre half pairing. I think there needs to be a solid spine behind the centre midfielders. I think he's still juggling players to find what best suits. It's almost like he's got too many sweets in the jar to choose from, if that makes sense sometimes. And I think sometimes he confuses himself. But I think when he has a limited choice, he seems to get the best out of what he's got. So I just wonder whether perhaps Eustace needs to strip back all his tinkering and go back to being hard to beat. And if we win 1-0 every week and we're getting 28%, then so be it. We were happy with it for 4 months last season, Jason. Why can't we be happy with it for the next 4 months? And I'm sure, and I agree with you, that will get us in the top six. This league is a plateau. It's very level. It's not a difficult league. The cream are rising to the top. Ipswich are in now third. Watford are now sixth. But everyone else is starting to drop. Wrexham are starting to get up there. Stoke are falling away. Hull are falling away. You know, it's there for the taking. And yes, we're not ready for the Premier League. And yes, I've always been forever the optimist this year. But you know what? Why not? Because the league is average. And I'll pass the baton back to yourself or Jack.
Yeah, I would agree. It is an average league, and I think the other thing that it boils down to, Jack, isn't it? It's we have had unfortunate injuries to key players at key times, and we know all clubs have that. And they say it's not always the team. The teams that get promoted aren't always the best teams. It's the ones with the best squads because they can obviously negotiate when something like that happens. And of course, you do have to strip it back, and I don't. Some fans don't like harping it on because it is in the past. We've been a championship team for one season. The second season syndrome could have easily have kicked in. Derby are, after the rebuild that they've had to do, are still a not just name and stadium and all that, but as the actual squad, it's sort of in its infancy again in the championship, and it would be very easy for Derby to get dragged in back into that relegation battle. You look at the Oxfords, the Portsmouths who made it last year, and now subsequently this season it's starting to catch up with them. We know Derby will always have a bit of pull because of obviously the name and the fan base and the training and the facilities, and I'm sure we've probably got a bit more money than Oxford and possibly Portsmouth to throw about. So Derby are doing very well to do what they do, and they're almost possibly a year ahead already. They're in that transition period where it's really hard because I do agree with Chris in the fact of there's probably not much else that's needed in this team that then it changes it the formula works and it turns it. But of course, there's only so much you can do in the season because you've got to be picking up points. Um, and if you don't pick up points, then you know where you end up. So it's all well and good working on this perfect formula and having these players, but if it doesn't all gel together, which I think is another big word, I just don't think we've seen enough gel from Derby this season. And as I say, that's hard though when you are swapping your centre back pairing, when you're flipping formation, when your midfield has changed 4 times in 20 games. I mean, it's and obviously your main focal point, everything, and any fan that's watching it and saying Derby should have got another way of playing. I don't agree with that. Derby have got one way of playing, and that's through Carlton Morris, which obviously we've not had now for 6 weeks, and we're probably not going to have him for another six. I think in the last 6 weeks he's tried to find a formula that is going to work, and we just don't have that other player that's going to do it. Adjiman can't play up front on his own. Um, Salverson, for me, hasn't shown enough. So, how many more times does he get? Does he get the go? Um, I must admit, one player at the moment, absolute chalk and cheese, and this is another talking point, slightly going off kilter. One player that, again, on his own might be isolated, but Ben Berrettini Diaz up front on his own, or in a two, I think you can hit him. I think he can hold a ball up. I think he's got the technical ability. I think he's got the nous to do that. I'd like to see that because at the end of the day, if you do move him further forward, I mean, even until Morris is back, you can then get Adjiman, hopefully Brewster, possibly Blackett Taylor, Bobby Clark, Frowler, whoever it may well be, even Salverson at that point. You can get another player in there in that forward line, right behind, then hopefully for the final 10, 15 games of the season, what could be a settled back line and a settled midfield. We might not see the best of this side till the final 10 games, which obviously is a crying shame for the other 30 odd, but that's just the way that football can be sometimes. And we've not had 5 or 6 transfer windows where we've got another 6'4" striker sat on the bench who we can hit. That's just where Derby are. But yeah, Ben Berrettini Diaz up front, I like that idea. But your opinion on what's Derby got to? Let's move it on for the final couple of minutes. What's Derby got to achieve in this second half of the season, Jack, for you to make this as successful as we possibly can?
I mean, I think success for me, I said at the start of the season, avoid the relegation battle. That was my initial. I'd be happy with that. That would be progress. With what we've seen, it's clear that this Derby side has potential to go higher, but as you say, there's just also these sort of hindrances. I mean, just to look through, I've looked through the final 11 games of last season, Chris. So the 21 points in the final 11 games after Eustace lost his first three in charge. 15 different players started. So Nyambi came in for Kane Wilson on a couple of occasions due to injury. Forsyth and Elder rotated on a couple of occasions. Forsyth was once in the back three. Then you had Caden Jackson start ahead of Jerry Yates for 1 or 2 games. And the other one was Vickers in for Zetterstrom when he got injured in the final few games of the season. But there you go. 11 games, 21 points, more than, just under 2 points per game, kind of promotion form came from having that consistent team. And I think if you look at, as you say, Derby's run this season, it came with having that consistent 11. And I think it's something you see with John Eustace teams at Blackburn and at Birmingham. It's something I highlighted really early on in the season when things weren't great to start off with. John Eustace teams go on these streaky runs, right? Where they can get a few wins together and then they might struggle for a few games and then out of nowhere they kind of pick it up again. And I think that has obviously been exacerbated, as you say, by Morris and Ozo and so on. We've had the only games we really had Langas and Morris fit were the wins, right? That has to be a factor in, but yeah, no, I think you've got to remember the pedigree of Carlton Morris as well. 20 goal season championship striker a couple of years ago. He's well on course to do that again. Heck, 2 years ago he was hitting double figures in the Premier League. That's the pedigree, and that's the difference between him and someone who hasn't played in this league before in Salverson, and a relatively young player who is still developing and being mentored by Morris, as Eustace reiterated the importance of on Sunday, actually, in Patrick Adjumang. So I think really for Derby now, success is at least get comfortably into that middle third. Ideally, top half. I think top half would be a good season. If we can keep ourselves somewhat in that playoff race until the final 3, 4, 5 games, Carlton Morris would be a big factor in that. But really, if Derby can get themselves to safety, then it is about gelling and building those partnerships because that is the foundation. And I think given the turnover, that's what Derby have struggled to do, as you say. So be that Morris and Adjumang, be that Langas and Sanderson, who do seem to have developed some understanding and a really good relationship off the pitch as well, to be fair. Uh, and whatever that midfield dynamic looks like, whether that's with Ozo and or Clark, whether they can come back next season is a different matter. But yeah, at least in terms of profiles and getting the players who will certainly be here next season used to their roles and the types of players that will surround them, I think is probably the key goal. In terms of Brereton Diaz up front, we've sort of seen it in the 3-5-2 when a Brewster or a Vyman has sort of played leading the press and then dropped into midfield. And you've had Ajimari and Brereton Diaz coming from wide. But to have him as an out and out striker would be a different proposition. And to have him in that sort of position with Carlton Morris as well, yeah, could absolutely work because we know he has good instincts in front of goal. You don't get, again, he's another 20 goal a season championship striker once upon a time. And, a lot of that was off the left wing. So yeah, there's pedigree there. It's about finding exactly how these pieces of the puzzle fit together. I think the question for Derby, as I'm waffling on here, is how they want to approach this last 20 games in terms of do they grind it out to get enough points on the board to be safe as quickly as possible, and then look at flooding other talents and trying to get that cohesion, or do they look to play in a way that they can develop to use going forward, even if it takes slightly longer to get to that points tally, and that points tally might be a little bit lower this season at the expense of, hopefully laying some good foundations. And I think that is probably the question for Derby at the moment.
And final question for you, Chris, and then we're going to wrap it up. I know this is probably looking a little bit um, too far ahead, really, as we're just over halfway. But a poignant point that Jack sort of picked up on there, because of the turnover in the squad that was needed clearly in the summer, we're going to have that again this summer. There's no two ways about that. Um, and maybe we can, if it's lessons learned or whatever it may well be. Um, but that is something that clearly John is going to have to do in the summer. Do you think he'll already know roughly some of these players just aren't that won't be around? I'm sure now with players, 6 months away from contracts ending, he must kind of know what kind of ideas, at least the ones that he can control. Of course, anybody can come in for any of our players. I'm sure Derby, whilst they say they're not a selling club, if the money's on, if the right money's on the table, then yeah, money talks, as we well know. Um, and of course, what we don't want to do is then go into another transfer window in the summer, turn over 11 players, and have the same issues that we've got sort of this season. So, how do you think we like again? How do we progress in the second half of the season with a one eye towards the summer window? Um, is it time that maybe just some people who he knows aren't going to be here just don't get the game time? I know that's harsh, but you've always got to look at the best interests of the club. But whilst balancing again, Derby have got to get results because at this moment in time, there's still just under half a season to play.
Yeah, I think Derby County for the last 3 seasons have pressed the reset button at the end of every season. First year out of administration or during administration, we came seventh, reset. Then we get promotion, reset. Then we survive, reset. And you're right, we can't continue pressing that button. Looking at the squad that played against Leeds, you look down at it now. I'd be interested if Zetterstrom's here next year. I think if the decent money comes in, which I think a wild offer is going to come in between now and the end of January, I think when you've got desperate times at the bottom of the Premier League, you need desperate measures. And if it gets you a very good goalkeeper for shy of 6 or 10 mil, then Derby are going to have to genuinely listen to it. Especially when you've still got. It's all about time in a window, isn't it? If someone comes in with 3 hours to go, and we go back to the original cash-in deal that fell through, it was purely because Derby had not enough time to replace what they were going to let go. Danny Batt, as good as he was against Leeds, I can't see him being next year. Ward would be a question mark. Blackett Taylor, I don't see it. Brereton Diaz isn't our player. Clark isn't our player. Salverson, I think, will go. Adams will go. Nelson will gone. O'Donnell will be gone. Ozo, will he be back? Who knows? Elder, question mark. And Vyman, has he got another year left? So there's 10 players just alone, and that's on an FA Cup game. So, you know, they will inevitably, I think, go. So I think a semi reset button may be the case, but 13 went out, 13 came in, as John Eustace always alludes to in every interview, which I'm sure, Jack, you get bored and hear him saying, but he always throws that one in. You might see 10 out, 10 in come July the 1st and yeah, in August. I think realistically you'll see four go out this window and three come in. I think you'll see three loans and a potential wild card may come in that'll be a long term asset. But just don't reset too much, John. But try and get that core of the team fit. Once you've got that spine and it's solid and they're committed, build around it. We haven't built around it in the last 3 years, and until we start building around the spine, Jason, we'll never get anywhere.
No, no, and I agree. Like you say, is there the opportunity to have the loans of other Championship players, Premier League squad players who might want to step down? I don't see the worth taking an 18-year-old lad, because let's face it, if he does well, he ain't coming back, and if he doesn't do well, he's not coming back. So I do think, like you say, if there is the churn of potentially 10, 11 in the summer, if you could possibly do three, like you say, three or four in January, and I know that's very, very hard to do in a January window, but if you could do three or four bit of business in January with a lean towards a deal in the summer for them to, and that's another 7 or 8 months that they've got ready to hit the ground running, and that gelling and everything that we've just spoken about may well benefit for next season. One team, I'll just put it out there. Fine, last one. One team in the Premier League maybe looking for a goalkeeper. West Ham. Interesting. I just wonder. I just wonder because they are. I mean, I wouldn't want to go down there at the moment, but I still say West Ham could probably double his wages compared to what we can offer him. So yeah, maybe just maybe a cheeky bid does come in January for him. Hopefully we can hold it off. I know there is conversations, I believe, about a new contract for him. So who knows? We might just be able to hold him because he is an important part of the spine. But like you say, goalkeepers. He was a signing for me, not to stay here for 10 years. I think he was a quick, hopefully make a couple of million on him easy, and then move him on. But we will wait and see. We've covered all sorts there, gentlemen, on this evening. As I say, the previews coming up that will be out. We've got Preston, Charlton, and then is it West Brom at
West
home?
Brom.
And
Yeah.
yeah, West Brom as well. So Jack, you'll be taking care of that one, I'm sure. Um, we'll be back next week. We've got after the two tricky trips of both ends of the country, so plenty of travelling for Derby to do over the next 7 or 8 days. But we'll be here to break all that down next week on the pod. My thanks go out to Chris Holt. Chris, thank you very much, mate.
All the best, gentlemen. Big game Saturday. Let's get a win.
And Jack, thank you very much for your time, mate.
Thank you. Yeah, bang on, Chris. It's going to be big. We're looking for revenge after what was a pretty lackluster reverse fixture. I'm going to make one suggestion, guys, and that is in terms of what we're looking at with the squad and where we see it going. I reckon we sit that down and we go through this once we hit the international break in March. We've got a couple more months of information and we can really see where we think things might go in terms of reshaping for next season, if that sounds like a good idea.
Sounds a plan. And just quickly, Jason, we should let the audience know that we've been nominated for that potential award.
Yes, bear with me. I'm very quickly getting. We don't like to gloat about success on the podcast. We do this as a love of Derby County and things like that. But it is always nice when you get all the hours that people don't see that goes into this, and arrangements, and Jack doing the socials, and Chris and Nigel doing the previews, and Corey's still here. Don't worry, just because he's across the other side of the pond, he's still firmly involved with a lot of the background stuff. I'm just the idiot that turns up on the microphone once a week. Everybody else helps knits it together. But yes, we have been nominated in the final of the 2025 Football Creator Awards by The Deck. It's out on our socials, so if anybody would like to vote for us, that would be fantastic. So we don't really do it for that, but it's always nice to know that we are doing things right, and Derby fans appreciate the time and effort that it does take to put it in. We know we're not the most polished podcast, but it was never really the outset that that's what we wanted. This was a proper good old chat about our football club through highs and lows, and that's what we've done so far, and that's what we'll continue to do. Chris, Jack, it's been a pleasure. Speak to you both next week.
Will do.
Yeah, on that, in terms of the vote, I've just made it the pinned tweet as well for the podcast. If you go onto our X account, yeah, that should be the first tweet you see.
Excellent. And as I say, the previews will be out for those games as well on the podcast and or the YouTube channel. We've got to work out how we're going to do it yet. But until next time, one thing left to say, and that is up the Rams.